So thank you so much for being with us today, Kristan. And I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you. I'm going to monitor the chat, and then we're going to do Q&A at the end.
Okay. Yeah, that will help my attention span. Because I do like to go down rabbit holes sometimes, as a lot of visitors know. Again, my name is Kristan. I've been with the Maritime Museum here since November 2016. And I play multiple roles, I guess. Visitor services is one. I'm usually always down at the front desk. I also manage our volunteers, mostly visitor services, but some education, some facilities. Otherwise, our manager helps out with them and assigns them certain places. So we have a lot of different kinds of volunteers. I was excited about this summit because being where we are, we're stuck kind of down in the southeastern North Carolina region. There's no other state museum around, I guess, unless you go to Whiteville maybe. But I don't think there's been a lot of opportunity for networking with other volunteer coordinators. And from what I've seen so far today, a lot of us have plenty in common as far as experiences. So that's good. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is probably some of the things you've already heard today. But there will be a few extra things. Our mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the maritime history of the Lower Cape Fear. Prior to coming here, my background was more in Latin American history. So I didn't have a lot of experience with maritime history, so I had a lot to learn. And then coincidentally enough, I learned a lot of it from volunteers. They showed me a lot. They showed me a lot of resources and vice versa. And we've taught each other a lot. And I feel like it took that many years probably to become comfortable with what I'm doing. I feel like I've always been more of an introvert, and me being down at the front desk with the public 99% of my day, also working with a lot of different personalities within the volunteers, has opened me up quite a bit. And we've had a lot of experiences since then. To give you an idea of where we're at, I pulled this from NCDCR museum, the museum map. And we are, of course, down below Wilmington on the coast. We are considered one of the regional museums under the Museum of History. And we are also, after being a regional museum, we're considered one of the North Carolina Maritime Museums. One of our other presenters, Kristan, is up in Beaufort, and then we have another up in Cape Hatteras. Very spread out. And the museum has been open technically since the late 80s, early 90s as a private museum. It started off as the Southport Museum. It had all volunteers until it was changed over to the state, I believe in 2000. And that's when they're able to hire on some staff members. We currently have 3 staff members. And we have myself, visitor services and volunteer coordinator. We have our curator of education, and we have our manager, and everybody else is a volunteer. And this gives you a little idea of the type of area we're in. It's a heavy tourist area, especially in the summertime. We are on the coast. We're at the mouth of the Cape Fear River. We have 2 historic sites, Brunswick Town and Fort Fisher near us. We have the ferry system as well. We have 2 lighthouses, Oak Island Lighthouse and Old Baldy Lighthouse. And so plenty of beaches and riverfront. We are located in Brunswick County, North Carolina, which is very rural and spread out, though we do have Wilmington to the north of us. So that's about 45-minute to an hour drive. But this gives you an idea of kind of the types of visitors that we do have throughout the year. And so our volunteers tend to be more retirees. Some are transplanted from northern states. We have them from all over, various backgrounds. We do have a lot of retired federal workers, state workers, engineers. We have a former attorney, former CIA, may have said educators already. It varies. We do have some younger volunteers. Of course, that is outweighed by the number of retired volunteers that we have. So usually 55 plus. Most, I would say, are 65 or 70 years old or older. So this is our staff here and what we do. And this helps break down our volunteer pool of what we have them do, their roles. And so I work with visitor services and volunteer coordination. I do the monthly state statistics. I help out with exhibits and research and writing and whatever else I need to do, just like everybody else. Our curator of education is over our programs, classes, school groups and tours, our outreach. Our manager is, she was the educator here and now she is manager and has been for a few years now and does it all. And so that is us in a nutshell. This is actually a slide that I show our new volunteers during orientation. It's just a dictionary example of a definition of what a volunteer is. And this shows you, this is a volunteer is a person who willingly undertakes a service. And it's not because of monetary gain. And it's usually a very humble person that wants to do something to assist or help our organization. And we do have a lot of dedicated volunteers. I feel very fortunate, and I know the staff does as well here. So our areas, we have a small gift shop at the front desk. So we do have what we call front desk volunteers. They work in the gift shop. They help with purchases if they feel comfortable. If they don't feel comfortable working at the register, we do help them out with that. So we do train, but depending on how much they retain, they may or may not feel comfortable with that. Sometimes we use the square system for register, and that can stress them out sometimes. So we'll usually have a staff member checking on them if it depends on how comfortable they are. Some do like to work by themselves and would rather not have anybody up here, and that's fine. We have exhibit guides that are out on the floor that interact with our volunteers or with our visitors, sorry, that sometimes they give tours or interpretation. They provide general information. All of our volunteers end up greeting our visitors, passing them in the hallway or whatever the case is. We have special projects and event volunteers for fundraising, school groups, maintenance and housekeeping. We don't have a regular maintenance person. We do rely on a lot of help with that. Groundskeeping. And then some of our volunteers will hold classes and workshops or participate in our programs as well. And then I always say that with the staff, volunteers, and our friends of the museum, which are also volunteers, our support group, that brings us all together and helps us make a united front and a smooth running system. And speaking of the Friends of the Museum, while we do receive a budget from the state, the Friends of the Museum provide a lot for us. They are a very dedicated group of people. Out of other government institutions I've worked at, and also nonprofit and also non-government. This is one of the most dedicated, passionate groups of people I've ever met to support a museum, and I feel we are so lucky to have them. You can see some of the things that they help us with. Our gift shop is run by the Friends. They help with membership, fundraising, capital improvements, donations, facility maintenance, utilities. Some also serve as volunteers down at the front or during our programs. They're not all just sitting on the board, but they're a very active board within the museum. They know what goes on in the museum. The picture below is actually when I first came on in 2016. It has a lot of information in this picture. I will show. So we have myself, one of our very dedicated volunteers, Linda, who's passed on now, our manager, Lori, current manager, Lori, one of our state port pilot writers, our newspaper, our former manager who's retired now, Mary, who started the museum. Way on the right is her husband, Wayne. Donnie in the background, who's been on the board for a long time. Julie, who's no longer in the state with us, she moved out. And then Jim, who also is very dedicated, and he's moved on to other things. And behind us, Bob Springle is our Friends administrator, who does so much for us. But you can also see we're holding one of our events in the local United Methodist Church. Southport's very small, so we're able to utilize different buildings throughout. We actually hold a lot of our programs in the community center building now. But this was one of the very first pictures I had with in my new job. And so when I came on recruitment, at the time, we really didn't need people. So usually about once a year or as the need arose, we would start a call for volunteers. We would put out a call in the newspaper. We have a few local magazines. They give us a lot of coverage for whatever it is we're doing. So we're appreciative of that. So that gets seen a lot. Social media, we're active on our website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those. Nextdoor app. We get our information out by word of mouth. A lot of our board members will go out and tell people about things that we need. And we do send out emails as well to try and recruit volunteers. On the right was a recent call for volunteers that we had in July. And so we'll hold volunteer orientations and trainings in person. Of course, over most of 2020, we did that virtually. And so we try to either pre-record or go live and see how that worked. We had a lot of trial and error and trying to figure out. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with Zoom prior to pandemic. So this is all still new. Instead of speaking in front of a large audience and having people stare at you, it's a little bit different. But we have, let me go back one, finish that. So in keeping volunteers for a long period of time, we have around 5 that remain from 2010 or earlier that have been here a long time. And usually they've had a regular shift. We've had a few people pass away while I've been working here. Some I was closer to than others. And some end up moving away, moving out to be closer to family. Again, these are mostly retirees. But when we have younger volunteers, say high school age, sometimes middle school age, depending on what it is, a lot of them have service hours that they need to do. And then some of them were actually participants in our children's programs, and they aged out and just wanted to become volunteers. And then once they hit 18 and decide to go on to college or work, they're usually gone. They'll come back in sometimes, but a lot of times, you know, that's it with them. We'll have college students come in for service hours, interns, and things like that. But our retirees tend to be the longest serving volunteers that we have. So we do, we're trying to work on a new volunteer management software with logistics that would be helpful in sending out notifications of shifts that we need in a more real-time calendar versus what I currently do, which is I send out a calendar with available shifts and dates and people respond back. And that's the same in education. We send out our opportunities and people respond back if they want those shifts or what they want to do. So we've been going by that method. We hold a volunteer appreciation event every year. Last year, we did have to do a virtual appreciation video, but prior years, we've done things like picnics or potlucks or a luncheon or something like that, or a barbecue, and get everybody together. And sometimes that's the first time those volunteers ever meet each other because they're never on the same shift. So they never knew the other person existed. So then they start forming connections, or they realize, oh, we live in the same neighborhood, or we've got a lot in common. And so people do have that aspect of socialization that they need. And they get a lot of that down here at the front desk as well with visitors. And so we try to hold regular volunteer trainings on different topics, volunteer workshops. I just did one on the most commonly asked visitor services questions. That was very entertaining since we are heavily involved with tourism. We get a lot of questions about local attractions and everything from the film industry to where do I take my boat for this or that? And someone asked the other day, how long can I park my boat was the question, park my boat by this restaurant? And I thought he meant pulling it on the trailer. He said, no, I came in on the boat. I'm like, oh, okay. So we're always asking questions or answering questions that people have. So there's always something to do, something to learn. And our volunteers really are good about it. And then other than that, so we will include them in our programs. We invite them to our programs. We invite them to be members of the museum to offer that support. That also helps them gain a connection with us. And I do talk with the volunteers quite a bit. Some I have trouble opening up more than others as far as what they used to do before they retired, and always get some really interesting stories. And we're also very involved with the community, and that's important. It's a few of our volunteers from past years. One of our docents that's given a lecture, another that's helping out with a temporary exhibit we had. This was one of our volunteer appreciation events. We had a tacky party. And some of these folks are moved on or no longer with us. We've held book sales and friends membership events. Any of our programs we have volunteers help out. And all these folks are very, very dedicated, very passionate people. we're very lucky to have this guy on. He does his engineer. He does a lot for us with helping to build things, repair things, you name it. He's one of the greatest woodworkers I've ever seen. We have people that help out on the grounds. And so we always try to include them within what we're doing in the museum to make them feel welcome. And on the right was our most recent 4th of July visit. So Miss North Carolina just happened to walk through the museum because she was in town that day. So our volunteer got to take a picture with her. And then we reach out to our local community. We have former Menhaden fishermen in Southport that are a wealth of information. Unfortunately, a few of them have passed on, but we do have an exhibit that we are very passionate about. We're trying to provide more information to the public about commercial fishing in Southport. We're expanding on some exhibits, but this was an interview we did just a few years ago, and we were lucky to speak with a few of these gentlemen that are not with us anymore. And on the right, we are involved a lot with the Coast Guard Auxiliary, the Coast Guard Station, Navy, Marines, you name it. And so a lot of them are volunteers that come in and help out with events. And we're involved with our Chamber of Commerce, which connects us to the community, local businesses. And we participate in workshops with them as well. So we try to keep connected to our local organizations throughout Southport and the Oak Island area in Brunswick County. And I got a lot of feedback. I actually did a survey with some of our volunteers. I sent out and asked them to answer some questions. And their responses were interesting. Let's see, let's chat around. But one, I'd asked him, why did you pick us? And this is one of our volunteers that's been here since prior to 2010, and he's held the same shift every week at the same time. But he says that he's lived in small towns, and that helped him recognize that everyone needs to participate in some sort of volunteering or community activity. And he's been very active for years. He rarely misses a shift. And still going strong. And he just celebrated his 80th birthday this year. And so one question I sent out was, when did you start volunteering with us, and why did you pick us instead of another? Again, like I'd mentioned, there's a lot of folks that grew up in northern states or worked up there throughout most of their lives, but then moved down. But they really didn't mention, I guess I was wanting more of what drives you really to volunteer. Maybe I could have worded it that way. And most of them began their answers with, I did ask when they started volunteering, but I wanted to hear, I guess, a little more about the connection they have with us. So I asked, okay, what has kept you here for the length of time you've been here, whether it's been 6 months or 16 years? And some mentioned working with the staff, which all of us, we're very close to the volunteers. I mean, it's not like they come in and do something and leave. We interact with them a lot. We consider them like family. We're concerned about their well-being and want to make sure that they're happy doing what they're doing. They shouldn't be working here if they're miserable. And then in general, a few of the jobs, these were a lot of the front desk people. They mention our scavenger hunts. We do hand those out, and that gives them a lot of interaction with the public, with parents and children and grandparents. And as far as some have regular shifts, about 50% of our volunteers have a regular shift they come to, whether it's once a week, twice a month, once a month, or they fill in as needed. So if I send out, hey, we've got an opening coming up, can anyone fill that? Then they will do that. A lot of people like the freedom of being able to travel and things like that and not be committed to just one spot. And that's fine too, because it works well both ways. Then we get into the pandemic. This was one of the, I've never experienced anything like this as far as trying to figure out personally how to deal with it. Also thinking about everyone else and how they're dealing with things. And then when we were closed, March 16th to September 9th last year, I was very concerned with morale or thoughts on volunteering coming back, how comfortable they were. And we've had some that have not come back. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some people had new responsibilities. Some people had to take on jobs. Some people felt that they just had a change in view of life and they wanted to start traveling. They may have had to start taking care of another relative or significant other. I've noticed a few volunteers that did have some decline in health, and just being isolated for so long and away from family, that was a big deal. So some are planning on, like they've contacted me and said, we're coming back in the fall. And again, in July, we did a big recruitment and we have gained some new folks that have started with us. And so there's a lot of reasons that people stayed on. And I guess the pandemic, whether the pandemic was here or not, you still have that transition of folks in and out of a volunteer role. They could have been here for 10 years and they just decided they're burned out now. They've had enough. They've served their time and they want to do something different. There's people that have multiple roles as volunteers. So in other places, there might be someone that works in hospice in the museum, at the hospital or the museum, has a part-time job, has other hobbies on the side. And so their time shifts in between those things depending on what the needs are. We have a lot of volunteer firefighters that still are active after being retired. But you see some of the answers. Some were just ready to come back, and they definitely were. Some have, I've noticed an increase in travel with some of them. And I've also noticed, they've kind of, their views on life have changed. Some, they're thinking more about their mortality. I've seen some that seem depressed. We do what we can with trying to boost morale. So in that category of retention, of trying to do things to show that we appreciate them, we'll send out cards. I took rides out to a few of the volunteers' homes, and we had to social distance as waving at them in their driveway and just giving them calls, emails, whatever, just to try and make them feel better. We also held we did around 4 different books. We did virtual book club, a social distance book club at one point, and that kind of got volunteers together and talking and things like that, and some virtual trainings. But it's been disheartening in seeing some of the volunteers going downhill health-wise. But again, over the course of the past 5 years, I've seen a few folks pass on, and we've had to go to funerals, and that's really hard, especially if you developed a closer relationship with them. And I think naturally people do that. There's some people that you tend to gravitate towards more than others. And that's, still the case. We have a few volunteers that I do tend to talk to a lot more. And we have a great friendship. So a few more questions I had given them. Prior to volunteering, what were some other types of volunteer work they did, or had they volunteered before? Had someone actually say, this is my first time volunteering. That was a retiree. And then these are pasted answers. So Oak Island Lighthouse, Dog Rescue, our local boat show, the Civil War Roundtable, youth sports, homeless shelters, kindergarten classes, elementary schools. You name it, they've done it. And then again, the answers vary in what they discuss about where they were employed before, or answering whether they're retired is pretty easily. So most are retired except for about three people that we have. And then I did ask for some feedback. I said, if you're comfortable with this, and we only got a few answers, so I don't know if they're comfortable with that or not, but I asked if they would share their insight on improving our volunteer program, or what do you think might contribute to a long-term volunteer. One mentioned one of our other volunteers that kind of took people under his wing and helped show people around. He was also a prior employee at one point, and he stayed on as a volunteer, as a docent. But one said, thinks it's important to be able to talk to different age groups and levels of knowledge, to converse with visitors and not lecture them. And he's talked a little bit about changes that we've had over the course of a few years about exhibits that we have changed out. And then someone will say something as, simple as, I think it runs pretty smoothly. So I'm not necessarily looking for negative feedback, but I want constructive feedback that does help, because I like to try and do things that are beneficial for everybody. And that brings me to the end. This is my contact information. If you have any other questions after this and want to contact me or talk about anything that was in my presentation, I definitely would love to keep in contact with other folks. I've learned a lot today from other people, and I'm glad that a lot of us are in the same boat with things. That's certainly encouraging that there are solutions to things that we may have issues with, and can always put our heads together and see if we can come up with something. Thank you.
This was really great, Kristan, and I really love how you just, surveyed the docents just to get a sense of how you're doing and getting that constructive feedback, because we did a survey sort of at the beginning, a couple months into the pandemic, just to see how they were feeling and what they would need in place before they felt comfortable coming back and that kind of thing. But I think this, just doing a general survey like this is a really good idea. And we do know about your big recruitment push in July. I mean, that made headlines in kind of the division level, that you guys had that big recruitment push through your social media channels. So that's really awesome. We do have one comment/question in the chat. Cindy Lincoln says that she loves your Instagram posts. She's asking who handles your social media accounts, because for a small museum, you really use social media effectively, and I certainly second that.
So I will definitely give many, many props to our curator of education, Katie Minnie. She has taken on a lot of our social media. she comes up with a lot of posts that we do. We'll do different themed posts. We've started like a national, whatever national day it is. It could be National Ice Cream Day. I don't know. We all pick that and contribute to it. We were doing a number of things during the pandemic. I think we even had yoga poses we were all doing, and it kept people entertained. And she does a trivia Thursday. She does a little video series where she goes out and rides around with different things that have to do with maritime history. So she's been on a pilot boat and over in the lighthouse and things like that to show kind of what's around here and how it works. And so other than her, we have our public information officer that also runs our site. So we are grateful for them. And she does work hard at that, putting out content all the time.
That's great. And Natalie is also asking a question, and I certainly want to know this as well. She wants to know, what volunteer software program are you using?
We are starting with Volgistics. We had been doing something as simple as creating just a spreadsheet for volunteer contact information and hours. I also collect those for the state every month anyway for statistics for our impact report. And then, so we do have sign-in sheets for the volunteers currently, and they record their hours. And I would send out whether it's a Word document or something like that on the calendar that they would, with vacant dates that they fill in. So we're trying to move into the next century with that. And again, that's something our friends group has helped out with a lot, because we're allowed to have, Volgistics can get expensive depending on how many users you have to access it. And we need all three of us to be able to send out volunteer opportunities to people. So we all need access to it. And then however many volunteers you want to add to it. And then also documents you can upload and things like that. So it's really cool. So we're just getting started with that. And right now we have around 60 active volunteers. I think we've kept about the same throughout the year. When it comes to special events, we add more. But during, I'd say the last year, we had to pause with volunteering. We went down to about, I'd say 35 to 40. And so after this active recruiting campaign we've added more people on. We may have some of the, again, those other volunteers that have held off may come back in the fall. And so we're continuing to grow with that. And again, just with what our needs are. I mean, the three of us running the museum, the programs, I wouldn't say we'd have an opportunity for 300 volunteers at any given time. So it stays about at that 60 mark.
Any other questions for Kristan? Pam is asking, do you have any problem with DIT and Volgistics?
Oh, you mean between DIT and Volgistics, or just DIT in general? So we run Volgistics just on our,
saying DIT online in general.
Yeah, I guess with all of our state computers, I mean, we updates, things running slow, if that's what you mean. I guess everything that usually goes wrong with the computer, we have to call in, but they help us out when we do ask them. So
did they give you some assistance with Volgistics?
No, we haven't asked.
Okay.
We haven't had to have that from them. Actually, Volgistics has a few hundred videos on their website for tutorials, and they have they have a rep that you can actually talk to walk you through things.
Okay. And then M. Riddle was asking if it's free, but assuming it's not free for you guys with the number of volunteers that you have.
No, I think it goes up. It's different tiers. When you're on there kind of, you create your own package. And so again, it goes up, the price goes up. You can either prepay a certain amount of months, or you can go by the month, and the price goes up for how many users do you have that's sending out information, and also the number of volunteers you want to manage. So I think it goes from like 50 to 100 and then beyond like that. And then again, like the number of documents you can upload if you're wanting to send out certain things or keep records within the software. So it varies. I'd say if you just did a search for volunteer management software, you could get a number of reviews. Also, YouTube has a lot of information about what people think about different volunteer management softwares there are out there, and what they think's best or what's worked for them. And then depending on your budget or your resources, what would fit you best.
Pam was asking how you got it downloaded onto the state computers.
It just, we've done it with, we just signed on, we logged in onto the actual website.
Okay.
We haven't had any program with or problem with downloads as far as I know.
Okay, because I guess she's asking you because a lot of times DIT has to approve things that we put on our computers. So that's probably what she was asking.
Usually if you know, it might take a few days, but if you send out that request, they will work with you to do that.
And there was another question. The chat's getting kind of busy here.
See that?
Really good thing.
I was trying to see if I could.
Do you use Logistics to schedule the docents? Jennifer is asking that.
We will be. We haven't got to that point. We just started this. And I see Kristan's said, looking at the website, it appears that there's not software, it's web-based. So maybe that's just my wording, but yeah, we've logged on to Logistics. So maybe that's why we haven't had a problem. There are some that they're actually downloadable software that I understand, but.
Okay.
Let's see.
Then Natalie, how do you get your docent to participate in programs? My volunteers like doing tours, and that's about it. I'm trying to get them more active beyond guided tours. I'm inheriting volunteers from a colleague who just retired, and her volunteers are stuck in my peers' old ways.
I think the type of emails and things we send out to them, we tell them, we give them more of a description of what we need to do, and we can simplify the job, add more people, but that'll get them kind of out of their element. I have some that like to do just certain things, but if I say that we really need the help or that it's urgent, we've have a very, I want to say, passionate group that they're like, well, whatever you need. I've had a few once in a while that will say, you know, well, I don't do this or I don't do that, and then maybe that's just not for them, and try to recruit more volunteers. That's usually what we end up doing. And I try to put people where they're comfortable. And I observe that over a period of time. And you'll see how just by reactions or feedback, some people don't really like to complain. You try to gather it other ways to say, well, maybe this is just not their area. Sometimes I think in some cases, you can't get everybody to do more than what they do. It's just the type of volunteer that they are and the type of personality.
Okay, any other questions for Kristan?